Hello. We had been discussing about the Greek philosophers and particularly the domain of the Middle Greek philosophers with Plato and his dialogues. We continue further to see which are the key themes that Plato has covered in his dialogues. This is Dr. Ananya Barua, Associate Professor in the Department of Philosophy, Hindu College. We have had covered some of the important key themes in Plato's dialogues like ethics, metaphysics, logic, dialectic, and more. We will be checking out after having discussed about aesthetics and love, about religious and mystical philosophy. Now we had said that the dialogue Phaedo, the central concern is the soul's purification, and its key idea is about philosophy as preparation for death. Similarly, in the dialogue Symposium, the central concern is the ascent to divine beauty, and the key idea is that love as a mystical path to the eternal. Now, many find a close semblance with our Oriental philosophy. Many say that, for example, in the context of Indian philosophy, in the Bhakti tradition, and we understand that in Bhaktism there is a complete surrender in the form of dance and divine songs for the celebration of godhood, where Mirabai is seen as the true bhakti for Lord Krishna, and the language of love transforms to being a mystical path to receiving to the eternal, and this ascent is what gives way to divine beauty. So Symposium is one work of Plato where a lot of possible research is possible in a comparative study. Similarly, in the dialogue of Timaeus, the central concern is about cosmic creation, and the key idea or the influence is the demigod and the cosmic order as a reflection of divine reason. And further, if we talk about the work on Republic, specifically Book 7, we see that the central question or the concern is the God as ultimate source. And the key idea of the influence is mystical illumination or ascent from cave to sunlight. Now, this is important, for we see that this very work about mystical or religious philosophy, there has been or there has to be an ascent from cave. Cave means darkness, sunlight or light means jyot, and this is where again a lot of comparative study from the Oriental tradition vis-a-vis our Indian philosophy can be taken up, and this religious and mystical philosophy is a classic theme for someone who would like to work on Oma Satoma Sadgamaya, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya. For from tamas or caveness do we attain jyot or sunlight, and of course and this of course says that the good is the ultimate source, and one, if challenges oneself, can move beyond caveness to sunlight. And the influence, as we can see, has been the ground of mysticism, specifically Christian mysticism, Plotinus, Sufism, and other later Vedantic parallels in comparative philosophy. So we see that there has been a lot of themes that have been covered by Plato, Socrates in his works. The key branches has been ethics, the foundational dialogues has been on apology and credo, Gorgias. The core idea is the virtue as knowledge and moral autonomy. The branch of epistemology, the foundation dialogues is Meno and Theaetetus. Core idea is knowledge as recollection and justification. Metaphysics, the foundational dialogue is Phaedo, Parmenides, Timaeus. The core idea is forms, soul, cosmos. Similarly, the branch of politics, the foundational dialogues is republics, laws, statesmen. The core idea is justice, governance, law. Aesthetics is the foundational dialogue Symposium, Phaedrus, and the core idea is love and inspiration. Branch of logic, the foundational dialogue is Sophist and Parmenides, and the core idea is dialectical reasoning. And the branch of mysticism, Phaedo, Republic, especially chapter 7 or book 7, Euthymius, and the core idea is soul's ascent to the divine. Now, we should further understand in the theme of epistemology, for this is where, or this is how philosophy is primarily known for. Not that metaphysics or aesthetics is any less insignificant. It is just that when we talk about how do you know, what do you know, what is there to know, the questions that we make, it is deeply seeped in Plato's work, the Theaetetus. And this should make all of us accountable to discuss about what the significance of knowledge is vis-a-vis the JTB, or justified true belief. Now, Theaetetus, the very work, if we are to give the background and the method, we see that Theaetetus is an aporetic dialogue. Aporetic means inconclusive. There is no conclusion. It was open-ended. Plato dramatizes an inquiry into the very legit question, what is knowledge? Socrates questions the young mathematician Theaetetus and refers to Theodorus the geometer. The dialogue's outcome is perplexity. Plato shows how naive or simple definitions fail under questioning. The dialectic is diagnostic rather than constructive. The frame of this picture, if we look at Theaetetus, we see that the written frame is Euclid's reporting a conversation between Socrates and Theaetetus just after a geometry lecture by Theodorus. Now, the dramatic date is before Socrates' trial, but that again is not very crucial. The method is important, and we should understand that Socratic questioning, which is also called as Elanchus methodology, proposes a definition. It examines implications and finds contradictions or inadequacies and moves on. Plato systematically considers and refutes several candidate definitions. The second part is the dialogue's main sequence. The three definitions of knowledge unfold. The first is knowledge is equivalent to perception. Now, Theaetetus first advances or is led to the idea that knowledge is perception, drawing on Protagoras' motto, man is the measure of all things, and the empirical idea to know is to perceive. Now, Socrates starts probing, and he says that Socrates rather challenges that if knowledge is merely perception, then it becomes entirely relative. What is true for one perceiver is not for another. He raises the consequences resulting to relativism, that if each person's perception is true for them, disagreement between observers becomes impossible to address rationally. So the problem of error and learning crops up. If knowledge equals perception, how do we account for error or for learning? If all perception is true for the perceiver, how can one be corrected? Dream and stability problems. Perceptions change. They cannot account for stable knowledge. Also, if perception is knowledge, then illusion, dreams would be knowledge as well, which is definitely problematic. Thus, the hypothesis, which is knowledge is equivalent to perception, is unsatisfactory. Plato uses this stage to highlight epistemic relativism's problems and to separate perception from knowledge. Now, definition number 2. Knowledge is true judgment, true belief, or doxa eletes. The statement is Theaetetus suggests knowledge might be simply true judgment, which is true belief, to know, to hold, a belief that happens to be true. Socrates' probing, Socrates examines why true belief is not obviously identical to knowledge. Accidentality, a true belief might be correct by chance or luck. Someone might have a true belief without understanding why it is true. Distinguishing knowledge from lucky true belief. So Socrates then asks, For what makes a true belief knowledgeable rather than is it just plain luck? The Meno, the dialogue Meno parallel here comes to our rescue. Plato earlier in Meno distinguished between true belief and knowledge. One can have a true belief that guides action, example a guide who remembers the road but lacks the account that makes it knowledge. So the conclusion is true knowledge is necessary for knowledge. You cannot know what is false, but it is not, true knowledge is not sufficient, something more is required. Then this brings us to definition 3, which is knowledge is equivalent to true judgment with an account, which is doxa eletes plus logos. Now to fix problem number 2, which was knowledge is just equivalent to true knowledge, Theaetetus, with Socrates' prompting, adds that knowledge is true knowledge or true judgment with an account or logos. Logos is notoriously ambiguous. Socrates seeks to clarify what it means. 2 or 3 senses of account tried. First, giving a name or definition. To be able to say what the thing is, but merely naming doesn't show understanding. A discriminating explanation, saying how to distinguish this from others, a sort of definition by division, and an explanatory structure or reason, that is, you can account for why it is true. So we see that Socrates' examination and problems, what is an account? Socrates explores whether an account is listing distinguishing features, a causal explanation, or a demonstration. Each reading hits some snags. And these snags are firstly infinite regress or forensic problems. For example, if an account is itself composed of items that need further accounts, then demanding an account can lead to regress or circularity unless clarified. Now, Socrates' paradoxes. Socrates presses on whether having an account really differentiates knowledge from true belief in a robust way. Can we always identify the relevant account? Are we able to articulate the account? Sometimes people know but cannot give a verbal account, that is the knowledge of how versus the knowledge of that. So that tension remains. So we find that for Plato, so Plato's verdict has been that true Socrates shows that true belief with account is problematic because account resists easy analysis. The dialogue ends without endorsing a final satisfactory definition. We are left uncertain about what logos must be. Now, other notable sub-themes and moments in Theaetetus is about the philosophy of perception, which we had started off with. Plato examines the epistemic status of perception, considering Protagonian relativism and the consequences for learning and error. Psychology or soul theory, Plato sometimes uses images about how the soul receives impressions, not fully worked out here as in the Republic, but it is present. The mathematical flavor. Theaetetus and references to the Theodorus, a mathematician, a geometer, bringing in mathematical themes. The dialogue mirrors mathematical rigor in the search for definition. Socratic irony and aporia, where Plato's method shows the complexity of knowledge and often leaves the reader with productive conclusion, aporia prompting further thought. So the question then is, why is Theaetetus central to epistemology? It is Plato's sustained, explicit inquiry into what is knowledge, and it prefigures many later debates like internalism versus externalism, analysis of knowledge, and separations of belief, truth, and justification. Crucially, Plato already sees the truth plus belief is not enough. He demands something like an account or a reason for the belief. That move is the ancestor of the JTB, or the justified true belief formulation. Now, when I talk about JTB, or justified true belief, there are certain components, and Plato's relation to it is amassed here. Let us decode. The standard JTB analysis, the modulation or the formulation in the modern formula, we see that philosophers traditionally characterize knowledge as belief is, say for example, the person believes P. Truth is P is true. Justification, the person is justified in believing P, for he has, say, adequate reasons or evidence. So, knowledge is JTB, or justified true belief. Now, Plato's true judgment with an account or logos is a clear historical precursor to JTB. That is, true judgment is equivalent to truth plus belief. You must hold the true proposition. The account is something like justification, which is, an explanation, reason, or rational ground that elevates mere true belief into knowledge. Plato's problem in Theaetetus is thus directly relevant. What exactly counts as an account or justification? His troubles with the notion anticipate exactly the conceptual precision the modern epistemologists sought. Now let's come to the get-here problem. Why JTB failed, or the brief explanation plus some simple examples. Now we all understand Edmund Gettier, right? 1963 showed that JTB can be satisfied while still not amounting to knowledge, because the justification can be true by luck or rely on false premises. The typical simple Gettier style example, or the informal style, is where Smith, for example, has excellent justification to believe Jones will get the job, and also knows that Jones has, say, 10 coins in his pocket. Smith forms the belief the person who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. Smith's evidence is strong for Jones will get the job, so he is justified. But then, unexpectedly, Smith gets the job himself and also happens to have the 10 coins in his pocket. So the proposition, quote, the person who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket, unquote, is true, and Smith believes it and was justified. Yet, common sense says Smith didn't know it. This belief was true by luck. So the moral that we see is justification plus truth plus belief can coexist without knowledge. When the true belief depends on luck or on defective inferential links. So major families of responses to the Gettier problem are, if we see, there has been proposals like add a fourth condition where there will be no Gettier, no luck condition, and the idea was to strengthen JTB by adding another clause that rules out luck clearly, which is called as no false lemmas, or the belief is not based on any false statement. The strength is that this simple patch to block classic Gettier cases. However, the weakness is it is ad hoc. That is, Gettier-like counterexamples were created that evade many proposed fourth conditions. The other attempt was no false lemmas, or NFL, where knowledge is JTB and the belief is not inferentially based on any falsehood. The weakness is clever Gettier cases were devised then don't rely on false lemmas, so NFL is not definitive. Then comes something which we call as reliabilism or the externalist view, and this is basically by Alvin Godman and others. Now, under Theaetetus, because we have been doing epistemology, we have checked about the JTB, how Plato has been the precursor to this entire gamut. We are also checking on reliabilism now. Now, reliabilism, the idea is that true belief produced by a reliable process, a process that yields a high proportion of true beliefs. The strength is that it handles many Gettier cases because luck is not knowledge if the process is unreliable. And the weakness is it is externalist, that is, justification can be external and not accessible to the agent. Also, counterexamples and the generality problem, that is, which process to pick, creates issues. Further, other philosophers like Nozick and others came up with safety and sensitivity principle in epistemology. Again, we have to understand that these are the ripples created by the work on Theaetetus of epistemology by Plato, so we are discussing it all here. So the sensitivity principle is this: if S had believed P, then if P were false, S would not have believed P. The safety principle is, in nearby possible worlds where S forms the belief the same way, S would not easily have believed falsely. The strength is it is intuitive handling of luck cases. Weaknesses are problems with closure, like deductive closure, and cases where knowledge seems to require closure under non or known entailment. So these views sometimes conflict with intuitive logical properties of knowledge. Further, when we talk about the virtue epistemology, which was proposed by Sosa and others, we see that the idea is that knowledge is success attributable to intellectual virtue. Now, what is this intellectual virtue? Intellectual virtue is the agent's cognitive character reliably produces true belief. The strength of it is that it emphasizes agent's competence, handles some Gettier cases. The weakness is that it debates about what counts as the right kind of cognitive virtue and whether this collapses into reliabilism. Further, there is this other proposal by Timothy Williamson, who discusses about knowledge first epistemology. The idea is that take knowledge as a primitive concept, explain justification, and believe in terms of knowledge rather than the other way around. Now, the strength is that, of course, it avoids trying to reduce knowledge to belief plus conditions, explains many epistemic notions in terms of knowledge. However, the weakness is the controversial move. It denies the traditional project of analyzing knowledge. So the defeasibility conditions and the tracking or the no defeat clauses, we see that knowledge must be such that there are no overriding defeating truths. The agent could have known a belief is justified only if there is no defeating information that undermines it. The strength is intuitively attractive for blocking luck true beliefs. However, the weakness is this, that it is hard to define precisely what counts as a defeater. Technical problems in borderline cases. So we come back to the question, how Plato's account or logos maps onto modern ideas. Plato's account is ambiguous. It can mean definition, explanatory reason, or demonstrative grounding. Modern justification is similar. Reasons, evidence, or reliable process that make the true belief non-accidental. Plato's difficulty, which is characterizing what counts as an account, is the very problem modern epistemologists face in specifying the right justification condition that excludes luck without being ad hoc. So the question then, what does Theaetetus give us today? The work Theaetetus that Plato had written aeons ago firstly helps us to, number one, diagnose core problems, that is perception versus belief, necessity of justification, the slippery nature of what constitutes a proper account. Number two, probes conceptual terrain, where modern debates about internalist versus externalist justification is there. Reliability and knowledge first approaches still roam. Third, the methodological model. Plato shows how to dissect candidate analysis rigorously, a model epistemologist who would still follow. So what can be further done? Some of the suggested steps are the primary text's recommendations could be some of the works that we must read, and that is definitely Plato's Theaetetus, the primary work, translation with commentary by Levitt and Bernier, and for JTB and Gettier, of course, Edmund Gettier's work is Justified True Belief, 1963, the classic paper. Alvin Godman's work on reliabilism, Ernst Sosa's work about knowledge in perspective or virtue epistemology, Timothy Williamson's Knowledge and its Limits or Knowledge First View. So these are some of the very important readings that one must do if one is inclined to having some takeaways from Plato's epistemological part, the Theaetetus. Now, when we pick up Meno, which is yet the other dialogue of Plato, we have understood this much, which is Meno is one of Plato's most compact but philosophically rich dialogues, and it is often assigned as an introduction to Plato's epistemology because it raises how we can learn, what knowledge is, and whether knowledge is innate. So as much as Theaetetus gives us a detailed explanation of some of the important takeaway models for modern epistemologists, his Meno also gives us a quick, crisp, precise work as to what knowledge is. Both are important when it comes to the knowledge part or the epistemology part from Greek philosophy. Now, Meno, we see that Socrates, where Meno is a young Thessalian aristocrat, a slave boy, and later Anytus appears briefly by implication. And the setting, if we are to see Meno, asks Socrates whether virtue can be taught. The question quickly turns into deeper inquiry, what is virtue, and then into the epistemological problem, how can we search for something we don't know. And if we are to see, it is a short aphoristic dialogue that mixes ethical and epistemological inquiry. It doesn't resolve everything, but performs a philosophical diagnosis. Now, it is interesting to dissect and to learn each of these key themes of epistemology from the Meno's angle, and we would be doing more of it in our next lecture. So far, we have had discussed about the Theaetetus from Plato's dialogue on epistemology. We will be continuing further with a part 2 on the Meno's part of Plato's epistemology. Thank you so much.